just type this up. Okay. So what I wrote here is basically up here is what the hypothetical deductive method is.
Yeah.
This first one is just, it's not part of it, but I'm pointing out that it's part of the assumptions we make when we have any theory, that there's always some mode of theoretical basis that
Okay.
we're reasoning from something. It's not like we're reasoning in a vacuum. So
But
anyway, you have a,
okay, go on. I'll let you finish and then I'll ask.
so you use an observation and check for previous explanations. So I might just see like observatory or something, and it makes me think of something. And so I might then use previous explanations to deal with it, like a tree turns black on the inside or something. And you want to know why that was. So you can find that existing explanation and make a hypothesis about it. Like, is it caused by a certain disease of invasive animals? Let's say that's your hypothesis. With that hypothesis in mind, say it's caused by bacteria from Japan. Let's say that, an insect actually. We could say that if that is true, if that were true, what, I mean, if this did happen, what would make that true? How would you deduce that? But if that's the hypothesis, what else would occur if it's true? If you introduce the like that the bug caused the disease.
What else is true? Hey, that's inversion. You remember that's, so it's almost incorporating inversion into the process. Where Sherlock Holmes style, if this
Somewhat.
person was doing this theft, what else would be true? And that's
Yeah,
the
or just
same
anything
process.
like that.
Cool.
Or you can, that kind of line of reasoning. Then you make a test for that. I don't know, say introduce the species, see what happens.
Yeah.
Now, if the tree doesn't turn black, then you know it disproved the theory. So
Right.
the hypothesis has to be false.
Right.
And you have to fix it up.
Okay.
And basically, this is falsification. It's not wrong, inherently wrong, but you can see it could leave out a lot. I mean, this is very deductive because you have a hypothesis, deduce what would be true. If the hypothesis is true, what happens? If it doesn't happen, hypothesis is false. That's all it says. It doesn't prove things true. It just says what can't be true.
Right.
You can't demonstrate the truth of that. You just can demonstrate that you have no other explanation. I mean, no other explanation has been falsified.
Right.
So, I mean, that's part of the
okay, I see.
Maybe.
Because so I remember from school the null hypothesis. So
yes,
the null, is that related to the null? Is if it's like, all I remember is if it's 0. How does that tie in?
Well, null is a bit different. That's just to say the hypothesis that there is no difference between the test condition and the normal condition.
Oh, okay.
So that's the null. Nothing occurs.
Okay. And that falsifies the hypothesis, like the hypothesis that this insect from Japan is destroying the tree.
Yeah, if it doesn't happen, if you introduce the insect to the tree and nothing happens,
yeah,
the hypothesis is false.
Right.
But then what you can do is you just modify the theory that you had already. It's like, oh,
right.
It wasn't the bug, it was just, it was some, whatever, what if you can think of. So, I mean, you could still run into the issue of, well, what if it was just cloudy for that day and the insect wasn't living long enough, or the insect wasn't healthy enough? Or you could just come up with a million what ifs.
But that ties into that ties back into, there's 2 ways you can go wrong that I remember. One is you've got the wrong method, and the other one is that there's some unaccounted for factor which you then learn and introduce into your knowledge.
Yeah, it can go wrong in several ways. So it shouldn't be. I mean, I think even Popper himself thought, I mean, he was more about this sort of thing and falsification. Like, he wasn't much about anything beyond this. Like, I think he had doubts about it, but I don't know the details really. But
yeah, okay,
it isn't a full theory really, or at least it's not really what scientists do in truth. if we actually look at what they do, it's not just that. There's a whole lot more to valid science. I mean, this is what Popper is saying, like, this is the only way to demonstrate the truth of your claims. Otherwise, we can't really prove it. It's just
So,
maybe.
So the hypothetical deductive method is equivalent to falsification. Like when someone says falsification, are they referring to the hypothetical deductive method? Or is it a feature of the hypothetical
It's a
deductive
feature
method?
of it.
Okay.
It's a feature of it.
Got it. I understand.
So
would
yeah,
that
it's
be
not
the essential feature
inherently.
of it?
I would claim yes, but I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of disagreement about that. But based on my experience as a scientist, I would say so.
And what did you mean by use observation and check for previous explanations? Like what are previous explanations, hypotheses that have been tested?
Yeah, I'll go with my real life example then, which is the next part here, down here.
Okay, one second. Let me, in case I just write down something so I won't forget. Okay, we can go.
Okay. So when I'm thinking about something, maybe I have these underlying assumptions, just the way I think about psychology. I think experimental psychology, valid thing. I can research the minds of other people. There's mental images. We have images in our mind that we need, visualize things. We can do that.
Yeah.
And information processing, just an assumption about the way, well, a reasoned idea about the way I think about how the mind works.
Okay.
And I just had almost assumed, like, even if I'm doing science, like, there's some groundwork we agree on anyway, if we're talking about, or even that science is a valid thing. Like, it'd be different if somebody said, well, everything's an illusion. There's no way to do science. Like, obviously, that'd be not even a common ground of thinking. So at least there's something to start with we have here. If we're doing science, if we're even trying to do induction.
Got it. That's your theoretical basis that you're taking as a it's like when we're discussing in philosophy, not assuming, but you're implying an accepted context. You're implying an accepted context. That's what you begin with, which is the theoretical basis.
Our implicit beliefs.
Yes.
Implied by what we're even thinking about.
Got it.
I mean, if you're not even a scientist, so like if you're thinking of like being a monk in a monastery, it might not occur to you to even think about this.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we go to the method itself. Say, I've observed that there are methods of mnemonic techniques that involve imagery. So, and dual coding theory is one, I've looked it up. I mean, this is what I actually did with my research. Like, I took that observation, did some reading about it, like on literature reviews, Wikipedia, other things. I found this theory. It seemed pretty good. I was using that as a way to explain what I'm observing.
Yeah. And
that theory is somewhat basically that we remember verbal things better as verbal. Mental imagery is best for remembering visual things. There's two different ways of encoding your memories. That's his claim.
Okay.
That's his hypothesis or his theory. It's called dual coding theory.
Okay.
This thinker, he's from the 60s and 70s. So, and I did use that. We'll discuss that in my results even. So I take that theory, go to number 2. I make a hypothesis about my observation. Like, why do mnemonic techniques work well? So verbal associations are remembered best when used with verbal techniques. Mental imagery is best remembered when used with visual techniques.
Yes.
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
Then if that is true, what would occur what would occur? That would mean, say, I have a list of verbal associations you make. I just give them to you. And I tell you, now remember them, but use a visual method. let's say that method loci, what should happen is that it won't work very well because they're different codes implicit by his theory. It shouldn't work.
Yeah.
So I test it. I try to prove it wrong. So I just give you some verbal associations. Like I give you the list, tell people to use the method, then compare it with somebody not using a visual method, see which is stronger. If one is stronger, if it's stronger on the visual, then you disprove it. So then you disprove two. But say it is consistent that people who have verbal associations, they don't remember the visual ones as well. Say that happened. Doesn't necessarily prove his theory true.
Yes.
It could be that there's other exceptions, what ifs, possibilities. And we would need something inductive to actually make a new claim. With this, we're just doing deduction. Is we're not coming up with a new theory or new claim or a new way of even looking at it. And that's more what I would say induction is about. Like this could work fine. It's not wrong, but are you going to ever reach a new concept with this? Can you come up with new theories based on this method? Can you take like 5 observations and make a generalization that in a new frame of thinking entirely?
But in step one, you can, right? That's where step one comes in, that's the inductive part. And then the only way that, because we don't have an explicit theory of validating induction, then we use this. So basically step one, my understanding, step one is the induction, unless you've taken someone else's induction. And then the rest of it is the pseudo, I don't know if that's the right word, but pseudo validation, because that's what we have right now.
I mean, this is just a deductive argument. It's nothing about like, this is just not induction. It's just a thing you can use to at least demonstrate the falseness of a theory. You can do it that way. But it's not inductive in the sense you're not taking some, like say, 5 facts and inducing a new concept by which to explain all those facts.
But what about step one? Isn't that can't you inject an induction in there, like someone's induction, if it's your own? Or
yeah, I think that would be fair, but I think a lot of, if you focus excessively on hypothetical deductive, I think you get too much caught up in like just checking for hypothesis and deducing. You might want to take more of a holistic approach and more like, well, I just want to see what happens. I mean, that's usually frowned upon if you use this kind of method too explicitly. Or if you use this explicitly, then you might frown on people saying, oh, I just want to see what happens. And this is really about, you got a hypothesis, deduce from it. It could be very stilted. It doesn't solve the problem of induction. It's all we can do with this is more like, in a way, that's what Popper, I think, argued, that this is all science can do. We can't do induction. This is the best we can do. And that's too bad, I guess. But induction would be more like Newton saying that gravity is a new concept that he induced from many observations, and that gravity itself was a way to explain old phenomena and new phenomena that he has not yet observed. Even that's more like what induction does. Not just there's a true concept, but that we can predict the now and the future. It extends into the future, and it even changes previous known facts. That would be more inductive, like you're completely changing it all. And that would be like the widest sense of doing science. This is okay if you're in a very narrow focus based on a lot of proven stuff. It might usually be for like when you begin as a scientist, like you might do it as an undergraduate. It won't be too bad because you're just starting out. You don't want to make spurious hypotheses and all that. But if you want to win a Nobel Prize, you want to do something inductive and wider than just deducing something from a hypothesis.
What, with the example of Newton developing the concept of gravity, once he wants to, like, once he says, okay, now let me validate this, then his only option is the hypothetical deductive though. So he's like, it would be like Newton would be, the whole process of induction would be separate, but then he'd insert that into step one of the hypothetical deductive. And that's how someone would then go, okay, this is, well, I don't even know. What do you actually say? Like with the first example you gave of some insect from Japan making the tree black inside, like let's say you spread that insect in a forest and all the trees became black inside. What would you say about the hypothesis?
Using this method,
Yeah.
you could say it's unproven. You
It's
can't prove it. You
unproven?
can only disprove with the hypothetical
Oh, that's
deductive.
all. So it's
You can only
constantly
disprove.
unproven. It's constantly unproven?
All you can do is disprove and move on to the next
Oh,
hypothesis. Or
okay. It stays unproven. That's weird.
which is different than what scientists actually do, which is more like they the best explanation they can. They don't just say, "Oh, I didn't falsify." That's not really what scientists do. It is more uncertain. It is more inductive than that.
Yeah. Yeah, although you can't, like, I can't imagine in a situation using the first example where you go, there's black stuff in the trees, like we know some insects cause it, and then, oh, let's just throw lollies around the forest and see what happens.
Right.
Like you would
Right.
still, you would still try find the best sort of thing you could, right?
Yeah, I mean that's more like what really goes on. It's not as deductive, I think, as Popper might have us believe. Or Popper
Okay.
is skeptical that induction would ever work. Like he's more like the skeptic side of things. Like this works and this is all we can do, like all we will ever do. But we're claiming that like, well, I don't think this is all you can do. It's just right now, it's just the only deductive way of doing it. And deduction can be limiting. If all
Right.
you have is induction, you're not going to get anywhere new.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
is useful to the extent that it's not invalid to do this. It's a good way to test a theory. It's very straightforward, very simple.
Oh, okay.
But
And
there's a
so
lot left out.
what did you say about most, or in academia or in psychology, people just let's see what happens? I didn't get that. So
No,
they
I
don't
was
use
saying
this
that.
method?
No, I would say that. Well, I said it wrong. I think I'm saying I think some scientists are too much deductive, and they don't like if you just see what happens. I tend to think that way about seeing what happens, and
What
most
is
people
that though?
don't like
What does it
that.
mean to see what happens?
Just like I don't really have a hypothesis, and just want to see what happens when I put 1 and 2 together. No hypothesis,
Okay.
just what happens.
Right.
That's not usually seen very well.
So that would
But
be
I don't know what that would be. Just
that
not
in
this.
science, that I would say that would fall under. So like I was thinking about what science is, and
Right.
it's observation. Like it's an endeavor we take on to, I don't know, understand the makeup of reality or some aspect of reality, and we
Yes.
do it through observation,
Yeah.
recording, and experiment. So what you'd be doing is observation and experiment with it, with just to see what would happen, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Without a hypothesis, even.
Right.
Other than a thing will happen. Like
Identification.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't like to assume too much at the outset. But
Yes.
that's why it's not really deductive, because
Got
like
it.
I don't have a theory. But
Got it.
there's many issues. And I'll share with you the other thing I was going to point out to do a new share. Okay, let's see. Okay. So this is what I explained to you.
Before you've done the deductive method, the hypothesis is disproven, and then once you've done the deductive method, it's still disproven.
Yeah, if it's disproven, it's disproven.
It's bizarre. Okay.
At least as stated, the hypothesis is disproven.
Oh no, sorry, I meant unproven. I didn't mean so only if it doesn't work out as expected. So it's constantly unproven, basically, unless you can find some one thing. No, it's constantly unproven unless you find some, like, you throw lollies around the forest and the trees don't go black, then you're like, oh, that's disproven. So it's constantly unproven, the status of the hypothesis.
Right.
Okay, that's
it
bizarre.
can only falsify
Yeah. Okay.
It can only say it's wrong. It can't say it's right.
All right.
So this screen just is what I explained to you.
Yeah.
Um, Scholasticism, this is just say, imagine there's a different way of thinking in the first place, which is what the medievals did, which is almost strictly, what did somebody write down before? How do I read everything anybody ever said about what was written down? How do I analyze those arguments?
Okay.
And that's about it. You don't
So,
use observation. It's just a
ah,
analytical argument all the way through. It's not about
that's
observation.
okay. I got it. So that's what, because I've heard scholastic medievalism. So scholastic
Yes.
means focused on textbooks without observation experiments
Yeah,
and
it's very dialectic and strictly about like reading what the author wrote and whatever they investigated or studied or wrote about. Then you analyze it, and it's just like literary analysis in a way.
oh wow, you could do that today. Like you can fall
In
into
a
that
way,
trap now. If I read
yes.
if I read just philosophy and I don't think of an example or even do experiments, or if I don't like if I read a textbook and I just sort of stay within the textbook without, if I'm reading geometry and I don't experiment and draw or build anything, then it's scholastic.
Generally, yeah, that's generally
Oh,
their
okay.
method, a lot about the logic of things rather than strictly the logic of stuff, rather than like observation of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, some can start to get a bit empirical. Aquinas does. He gets a bit empirical because he talks about Aristotle so much.
But
But
nothing like Aristotle, who was dissecting animals and teeth.
not to
and
the
that.
same extent, no.
Yeah. So was Plato scholastic then? Because he didn't, I don't know if Plato
I
and
wouldn't
all
say the
those.
Greeks were,
Oh,
when they were still out in the world and talking to people and walking around, looking at stuff. I mean, it's not as ivory tower, where you could say scholastic is literally ivory tower. Like you're in your building all day and that's it. You're not even like leaving to walk
yeah.
around outside.
Okay. I think I'm a bit scholastic then.
Yeah.
So
And
Diogenes was the opposite of scholastic. I read about this guy called
basically,
what
he's
is
such a
he?
cynic.
Okay, yeah. Anyway.
And this is the last thing. So this is from Francis Bacon.
Yeah.
And basically that main piece on induction, that's where most of, I think, what Rand said about induction is a lot to do with what Bacon said, Francis Bacon,
Okay.
in the Novum Organum. And one thing he said, and it's one thing to avoid in your thinking, is what he called idols. Avoid these idols. And he meant it metaphorically, like you idolize, like don't idolize the tribe. Don't just make a view that's because everyone else says it, or take into consideration. You might have, say, personal biases. Is it idols of the den there?
Of the
Or
den. What's
from
that?
poor, what do you say?
What's idol of the den? I get the
You see,
tribe. That's independence, right?
yeah, I'm just reasoning from what these words say. It says idols, you see it?
Of the den, yeah.
Yeah.
What is
So it
that though?
seems like, sounds like biases, like bias for yourself, like cognitive bias or confirmation bias, things like that.
Okay.
Like what's unique to you, and or say you have a tendency towards, say, skepticism. That's maybe an idol that you don't want to ignore, or that you do want to ignore, or misuse of language. That makes sense. Like, does it make sense even what you're claiming? And dogma as well. Avoid dogma. And he said, destroy these idols. They prevent proper thinking. If you use these things, destroy your idols.
I like that he uses an analogy of idols.
Yeah, he said, destroy them. I think Nietzsche built on that actually. We used that book, Twilight of the Idols. His book, Nietzsche wrote that book, and
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
it's related to this,
Yeah.
but he's in a different, like the idols of like society and things like that,
Yeah.
or dogmas we have held, is like this is twilight, is the end of
Yeah.
those dogmas. We just smash them and reevaluate everything. That's basically Nietzsche for you. That's why he's philosophized with a hammer. He's destroying those
Because he's
idols
smashing
with a
idols.
hammer.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. Okay.
And it also comes from a Wagner play, Twilight of the Gods. So Nietzsche likes to play around with words like that. He
Oh,
makes
cool.
references like that.
Yeah, it's good to have that context.
So it's about these sort of idols, which might come into play with like hypothetical deductive. It could become your dogma if you just use this deduce, falsify, and just go in circles.
Right.
It might be an idol in that sense. And if you want to do something new, you smash that idol and just ignore it and just do something else. Go beyond it, I guess you could say. Yeah, and this was
That's cool.
dual coding theory, but it's not relevant. So yeah, that's all I had to show you.
I like that. Right, let's share. You got to okay, some random questions about philosophy, and then we can
Yeah.
going. So I was rereading the start of Opar. It says philosophy is an integrating science, but every science, like I get philosophy is the ultimate integrator, but every science is an integrating science, right? Like everything in a sense, or am I misusing that? Like it's saying it's actually the science of integration, whereas every science like psychology and physics integrate something else. So philosophy integrates science and it integrates everything else, but sciences integrate only the things they're studying.
Yeah, I would say that's Peikoff saying that.
Yeah, it's Peikoff.
Yeah, that's how I would interpret it. They saying it's the most widest integrating science. It integrates everything about reality, more beyond than just the mind or inanimate particles.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And then there's a section where he talks about how, which is what I did at the start, but when all philosophical questions are interrelated, so you can't just ask them raise them at random, like he says, like some kind of a grab bag. Philosophy is an integrating science, so it's not a grab bag of isolated issues, and you can't raise questions at random without a requisite context. All knowledge is interrelated. That's the principle. So if you try the random approach, you just have millions of questions proliferating in all directions. Doesn't that applies to every subject though too, right? Like if I study psychology, if I don't have a requisite context that I accept, then all my questions will proliferate everywhere. This is not unique to philosophy, this issue.
Yeah, I think that could happen with many scientists because a lot of scientists actually don't think that much about philosophy. So their questions can end up that way. That's where they kind of end up with just hypothetical deductive because it's the only way to keep them sane, I guess you could say. Otherwise, there's so many what ifs.
Could you give me an example? Like what do you mean the hypothetical deductive is the only way to keep them sane?
I mean that
That's
they
interesting.
would have too many questions and too many what ifs to come towards any answer that they would feel better just to feel like they're making progress, at least say, oh, I proved that I falsified it, or just continue on that track rather than trying to integrate a great many set of facts into some wider generalization and newer theories and concepts like that.
Okay, so then is the innovation and the ingenuity, you could say, what's the word? Bottlenecked at the level of induction, and everyone's sticking to innovating in terms of the way to you test a hypothesis, like interesting ways to test hypotheses, as opposed to inducing a new theory to base a hypothesis on.
Well, I think it separates the good scientists from the bad ones, or the best scientists from the less good scientists.
Give me an example of what the best does and what the medium one does.
I think the best would be more inductive, more interdisciplinary, more philosophical, more at least recognizing that there are philosophical implications, be a more creative approach, not as that's almost like describing what makes someone a creative individual that comes with wonderful new ideas, as opposed to someone who's just good, but just more of the same. I mean, there's that kind of distinction. I guess we can think of Richard Feynman. He wasn't really about, even the way he talked, it wasn't like, here's the hypothesis that from some existing way of thinking, let's disprove it. I mean, he was all about these weird thinking ideas, like imagine an alien that's on Earth and to explain everything. And he liked to approach things that way, and always had a just that kind of way. Like, we know they're good because they get Nobel Prizes, they affect thinking of others, they change the field, and they go beyond just deducing from some given theory. They create the new theories.
Can you give me an example, if one comes to mind, of like how you can raise a question in psychology that, you know, like if you don't stick to the hypothetical deductive, you go insane? Like, what kind of question throws you out and makes you uncomfortable in psychology? Like, that's more philosophical.
I think conceptual development can be that way in psychology, that I don't think people always recognize the philosophical implications or where it stems from. Like
Of what?
Piaget,
Of conceptual development?
yeah, as a science, as like, how does the child learn the concept of counting? How does the child learn to count, for example?
Right.
And Piaget, one of the thinkers, was influenced by Kant in particular, but I'm not sure if many scientists really know or care that Kant has an influence on him.
Right.
Things like that. But Piaget himself was innovative, but I don't think he was old like everyone else. I don't think he was strictly about how do I just falsify what I'm thinking. When they do science, it's much more than anything hypothetical deductive. And probably most scientists don't want to just be hypothetical deductive, but I think in practice, some of them are.
Got it. I think I just remembered that ages ago when I was studying in school, and I'd get caught on a problem like in maths or something like that, and I would question even my senses. So I was like a Humean skeptic even then. I'd be like, well, how do I know that if these two lines continue, they won't meet? How do you know that this pattern keeps happening over and over again? And I don't think anyone would have had an answer for me then. They would have just said, it's just what it is. But if you gave me a more detailed philosophical answer, I could go with it. But with people, if people just say it just is what it is, you don't go anywhere. And I can imagine, I don't think most people would be like that kind of skeptic, but I imagine there may be similar issues. If you start to raise a philosophical question, most people won't be able to really give you any sort of anything beyond a superficial, it just is how it is.
Yeah, I think at some level, many people do accept induction because it seems to work a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe it works. You say it works 70% of the time. That's pretty good. It's just mostly the philosophy of science stuff. It's like, well, what about 100% of the time? We don't have a 100% effective method yet. And that's what some scientists or philosophers of science don't even think is possible in principle. An objectivist would say you could, but not Popper.
It really clarified to me this side. Like, what about them thinking about this, like the either you can go wrong in two ways. Like, one is the method, so you've counted wrong or something like that, and the other one is simply an unaccounted for factor. Like, that seemed, well, at least how I'm looking at it now, I know it's not simple, but it just seems so simple. And like, what else is there? It's just that. So you can be 100% right within a context when you think that way. Like, why did that not just catch on? Because when I say that, it sounds so simple and straightforward. But then where's the confusion? Like, okay, unaccounted for factor or wrong method, that is it. Unaccounted for factor means new knowledge.
Yeah, I think some people might say you're trivializing it, maybe
I
save a
know I
claim that.
am. I know I am.
Yeah,
I don't think this is easy. I just don't.
right.
I am. How's it? Where's the
Well,
complication?
the complication I think is that, um, well, what I meant was that the complication is making wide generalizations that don't seem trivial. Like obviously you can use context to say that at this moment, at this time, this happened,
Right.
but to generalize to more than one instance and in the future,
Yeah.
especially about the future, that's where it seems to be the issue.
Right.
The problem isn't so much just the context, but prediction or a reasonable claim that would apply to other situations. Like with the sun rising, that's essentially the problem of induction. How do I know it will rise tomorrow? You
Right.
can easily say in this context, at this moment, it rises, but generalizing it to say it will rise tomorrow in other places where it gets much more complicated. And
Right.
that's where the questions come in.
Or knowing if you're when you're in the right context and when you're not in the right context.
Or
I don't
that
know.
too. That's another issue. Yeah.
I wanted to also get your thoughts on these analogies I was thinking of for like philosophy. So one is, so in the essay Philosophy You Need, she talks about either define it consciously or you let your subconscious accumulate a junk heap of conclusions. So, and then the ball and chain or wings. And then I got this one from Atlas Shrugged, actually. The young bird learning to fly, or its mum clipping its own wings, or the bird itself clipping its own wings. And then the other analogy I thought of, so just if you have any thoughts or additional ones, and the cave and the light as well, like you can stay in the cave or you can go to the light. So evasion or ignorance or conscious knowledge. Or another one is actually the Matrix, right? Where he talks about um, you come to philosophy because you felt it your entire life that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It's what brought you to me. And then I just
Yeah.
replaced Matrix with philosophy. And then philosophy is everywhere. It's all around us. Even now in this very room. I thought about
Yeah.
any thoughts on those analogies?
Yeah. I like that, especially like the young bird learning to fly. I was like, you gotta live by your nature. If you clip your wings, like it's anti-life in the most obvious way. I really like that one. Like with regard to choices, the gave her the light is actually a better way to phrase that than the usual. Like, oh, it's just skepticism of the senses. No, it's primarily about, do you seek knowledge or not? Are you fine with this, the shadows of the truth, because you're used to it, or do you go into the light even though it initially hurts because
Yeah.
it's blinding?
Yeah.
I do like that, but I especially like also the Matrix one though, because the going into the light, even though it's painful, is a bit of a negative view about knowledge. Like knowledge can hurt you. Like, no, not at all. But with
Oh,
Morpheus, that's
right.
more like,
Right.
that's more the context. Like it's liberating to see philosophy. You wouldn't say, oh, maybe someone would say waking up is painful in the Matrix. But maybe Morpheus would say, well, that's not pain, it's truth, which is more liberating than
Right.
anything else.
Yeah, the analogies can break down because you've also got the Garden
Yeah,
of Eden or getting out of the Garden of
right.
Eden. And it's like, yeah, just stay ignorant and it will be bliss.
But yeah, those are good examples of concretizing it.
So I was just wondering about these theories of forgetting. I found them interesting because I thought about the one I found most interesting was forgotten cues and as opposed to decay, because I'm just thinking about personal experiences. I've definitely had the experience of remembering some very mundane, like there's nothing special about the moment, just some cue triggered some memory from like 9 months ago where I'm just walking at a particular spot and it feels like deja vu initially, and then you might realize, oh, that was just a memory. And what are your thoughts on these theories of forgetting?
Um, well, decay is pretty well demonstrated throughout, even rats, even. That's
Yeah.
pretty well demonstrated. Interference also well demonstrated.
Oh,
It's not
okay.
to say that, well, it's just not even overwriting necessarily. but it cause issues in recall. Like if I hear at the same time, or if I'm learning at the same time about philosophy, and then another at the same time learning about doing, I don't know, a better example would be um, I'm learning about math, and at the same time I'm learning about um, botany. It might be interfering when you're trying to recall one thing, it might interfere with the other.
Okay.
Sometimes it could happen if you study similar things. So if you're
Yeah.
studying the heart and the lungs at the same time, you might get confused them together if you learn them at the same time. Forgotten cues, well, I'll explain it this way. So there are cues to help you remember things. I would almost call it like second order remembering, because you're not remembering the thing, you're remembering the memory of it. Like you're remembering the thing that reminds you of it. It's just a reminder.
Yes.
Say
Yeah.
if keys remind you of a car, it's not that it's just second order remembering the keys within that thing into the car, rather than just remembering the car. Forgotten cue is more like just another level away from that. Like another level of you forget the cue, you forget the second order part, so you don't, and you can't access the memory directly. So it seems reasonable.
Doesn't
Yeah,
this raise? Sorry, continue.
I don't know if you would say that it's like a lockbox with no key. I would almost wonder if you forget the cue and you can't remember the thing it refers to, then you've forgotten both. It's just no box with no key. That's how I would say it. It just disappeared. The key and box have disappeared, I would say.
With decay and interference, don't they both raise the questions of like the validity of knowledge then? Because we say memories are certain, but that at least that's what I think that's what objectivism says. Um, but doesn't it, if they're not, if they decay, or if we don't recall that, if we're fallible in recalling them, isn't that, how can you say that like memories are certain?
Well, decay would be more about specific instances of things. It'd be hard to say, do you ever forget? It never completely disappears. A memory is never at zero. It's more based on like remembering lists of words, and over time you remember fewer, and it
Okay.
stabilizes at some small number depending on the
Right.
list size. Like if
Right.
you learn 20 words in a month, you only remember 4, but you remember those 4 words like forever,
Right.
practically. Meaning
And
by the time you die, it's like 2 words, like it barely decays.
and but we don't know too much about the nature of that process, do we? Because, for example, decay might mean actual death, but do we know if it's actual death? For example, if someone only remembers 2 out of the 20, but then they relearn them again and they can learn them much faster, for example.
Yes, they can. They usually can learn it faster.
Yeah, okay. So, but we don't know the exact nature of the decay. All we know is that we're sort of metaphorically or figuratively referring to the process as decay.
Yeah, there is a rate of decay, and
Yeah.
you can measure it, but it seems to be that having learned it once is easier to learn again,
Yeah,
even
okay.
though it did decay. There's been studies in that for sure.
Right.
But this is one of the more basic things to study within memories, like probably the oldest thing to study practically, even as
Right.
long as rats.
And what did you say? You said something about Nietzschean memory you were reading. And so I don't know if that was related to the smashing idols with the hammer, but
More the smashing idols, but he was distinguishing between memories you acquire just by sheer like assimilation, just like you pick up um, passively whatever you're told to remember. Like remember this, so you do. Is like you're not taking into account what you should or shouldn't. It's just like you absorb it, and that's all it is. And that would be passive memory, which he sees as a negative thing.
can you
And memory
explain? I
should
didn't
be
get
more
that. Like
active.
what does that mean? A passive? I didn't someone just tells you what to do?
More or less, that you're not thinking for yourself, deciding what to remember. It's just whatever happens, happens. It's no will involved, no
Oh, that's interesting.
structuring.
So you're
That,
saying, yeah, go on. I'll let you
that's
finish. Sorry.
passive memory. And in distinguish that from a more active memory, which is about like you choose what to remember, you seek to remember that and enhance those memories, and even forget things that are useless to you, which he kind of meant that in a subjective way, but you could think of it also as a way like throughout the useless knowledge. It doesn't need to be remembered as useless. It has no function. Keep what affects your life, improves your life, and choose to remember those things. Make it memorable. Make it worth remembering. Things like that.
Okay, that's
And
interesting.
that distinguishes from a passive person versus a more active and more admirable or strength of will.
So you go about your day and something sticks out to you, but you say, this isn't important, forget it. And then there's something else and you're like, note this is important. That would be active, right? Someone who's
Yes,
like
you're
directing
deciding and
themselves
valuing.
consciously.
Yes.
But
And
what I
that's
don't,
what's, go ahead.
yeah, no, continue.
Yeah, and that distinguishes the more person with greater strength of will compared to weaker individuals. That
But
strength
then,
of will.
but I find like, I can't, like, how can it's hard to just say, forget this, it doesn't matter. And it's
Right.
hard to also, if you look at something and say, remember this, it's important. It doesn't mean like the subconscious seems to have like a massive role. So does he say anything about that?
I don't think so.
No.
I just found an interesting take on at least the way of conceiving a memory. That is not just a thing we can take for granted, it's actually part of who we make ourselves to be.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because I haven't thought about one aspect of being as conscious as you can be, if you want to go with that word, would be trying to give yourself commands for what to remember and what's not important. Or maybe another way to say it is note what's important and what's not important and give yourself the command to remember what is important on a conscious level as opposed to just purely subconscious.
Yeah, which is a different take than Nietzsche, but it's just more to remember Nietzsche is more about like that passion that you of your will, but objectivism would be like, well, that passion's good, but it needs to be based on reason. And reason has to be involved in some way, or it's
Okay.
not, it shouldn't just be subjective emotionalism or anything like that.
Right.
You have to validate and verify.
So the passion of the will is what, in Nietzsche's case, like whatever you feel like, basically. But that's
Yeah, he didn't use
essentially the
those words,
subconscious anyway. Yeah. Okay.
more or less. He's more about the subconscious asserting itself.
Although if you're if you're if you're if you're the subconscious asserting, if you're like let your subconscious assert itself, then where is the, maybe we're getting too deep into this and we'll save it for when we go through
That gets
Nietzsche.
us more deep Nietzsche,
Yeah,
deep cut
okay.
to Nietzsche, I guess you'd say.
Okay, let's save it. We won't get into it. Disciplined versus purposeful process of thought. My thoughts on that are just, you can have a purposeful process of thought, which means all your sub thoughts are related to the purpose. But disciplined would mean, I think it would refer something to like, if you're thinking about some topic, it might mean that every morning at 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. it's sustained over time. And you're like, now is my time to think about it. I don't know how else to explain the difference between disciplined and purposeful. Disciplined is like, I think more to do with time than, that's my understanding. Any thoughts on differences?
I think that's more a personality thing. Some people are better about regimented times to do things. To me, it depends. Some subjects that's good for me, others it doesn't help. I think it depends.
Okay. But then what is the difference between a disciplined and a purposeful process
Well,
of thought?
purposeful seems more general, just that there's a reason to do what you're doing. But disciplined in your sense seems to be a more narrow take on that, that it's got to be a regimented time or a routine time rather than just purposeful. It's purposeful with a routine.
Okay. What's your take on discipline then?
Discipline, I think more as great as a more like maintaining diligence on a subject, less about the routine, but diligence over time,
I
that you
like that more.
recognize that you're not recognizing that you're not procrastinating, recognizing that you're doing it when you choose to do it. That would be like discipline. You're sticking to it.
Right.
And there's what techniques you can use to stay disciplined, or even to prevent falling out of discipline.
That's interesting. I like yours. I can see how yours is more broader. I just had one specific concrete instance, but yours captures that. What are the discipline techniques you're thinking about?
Well, say more preventive. This would be like if you play, it's happened to me before, like play a video game too much. Really the only way to get out of that routine and be disciplined again is, say, go cold turkey for a week. Don't even play a little bit. Just do absolutely nothing in that game. And then I could remain disciplined. And then after that, I could play much more controlled after that. Like I'm not gonna fail at my own discipline and be able to do it better. Or the way to stay disciplined once I am is focusing on my further objective. That's one way. Another way is to just give myself a block of time. See, I'll work on this subject sometime between 12 and 3 p.m. Doesn't matter when, as long as it gets done in that period of time. So it's not strictly regimented. On the other hand, it's an expectation in my mind.
Okay. That's cool.
I've always liked that method better, the blocking time rather than say 12 o'clock, this is what I do. It's like, well, in the afternoon, I do this. It'll be done at some point.
Yeah, I
like,
guess that is.
Gotta make lunch and read a book. Okay,
That
not
is
too
a
bad.
personal difference. Yeah, I do like to force specific times because otherwise I don't trust myself to get stuff done. Is going back to just a quick recap of virtues, all these different aspects of rationality, independence, integrity, honesty, justice, blah, 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 they're all aspects of rationality, right?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
I would say so.
But
those and
rationality isn't.
more, because
What do you mean?
these are you could maybe make a further distinction depending on how many instances you think of. Because these are the main ones, but you might be able to come up with another. It's just
okay.
by saying at least these.
So
you could, who knows, maybe you'll discover a new one. But as far as objectivism goes, these are the focus. Those seem to be the ones to talk about.
So if this is rationality, this box, and then what is it? How many more? Whatever there's, and then within that, like there's stuff in here.
Yeah.
I'm just putting in random text, and then here might be so there's other stuff within rationality that you're saying is there, and then there's these other virtues that are defined in objectivism, right? So I think about it like that.
Yeah, there could be other instances you maybe don't know how to classify, but they fall under rationality.
Right.
But each one fits into rationality for sure.
Yeah, because she does often, I've seen at least in OPA, I just had a quick look again, there's all this talk about rationality, and same in Vision of Ayn Rand, which I haven't read, but there's all this talk of rationality, and then each of these is given their own talk. So it's like what's in rationality is the stuff they couldn't fit under one specific aspect of. Yeah, okay.
Or things you've yet to integrate that apply to rationality, but you don't yet know how to classify them. Yeah. Say you get one thing that happens, like, well, I don't know if it's independence and integrity, or independence and productiveness, or all of them, or not one, or things like that. Yeah. But I know it's rationality. I just don't know exactly which.
Okay. All right, I get it.
That's the use of the categories too. That you can put something there, even if you don't quite know all the details. Like it's related, but you don't know everything yet to make further distinctions or related to the subcategories yet.
Cool. That's helpful. Good session today.
Yep.
I will